Welcome to the Deep Seat Podcast. This week's episode is a conversation with one of the most experienced experts in agroecology in Europe, Alain Peeters. Since it's a topic that we have not yet discussed on the podcast, I wanted to get a general overview of what agroecology is, the key principles, how it differs from other farming systems like conventional, organic, or regenerative, and the solutions it offers to the problems facing the current food system. Right from the start, I want to share with you one of my favorite learnings from this conversation. Agroecology is a combination of ancestral farming knowledge with the most up-to-date scientific and technological advancements in order to create the most intelligent, complex, and beautiful farming system possible. This episode was made in partnership with Soil Capital. I'm your host, Raphael, and this is the Deep Seat Podcast. My guest today is Alain Peeters, an expert in agronomy and agroecology. He is the vice president of Agroecology Europe Association and the director of an NGO called Terre Vivante. Hi, Alain.
Hi.
I just briefly introduced you. Is there anything more that we should know about you?
Well, I'm more at the end than at the beginning of my career, so there are many things to say. But I could summarize briefly my professional life, mainly because I think it's interesting to understand why people do what they are doing and not only how they are doing it. Well, I created my first NGO in 1970, so quite a long time ago. I was a teenager at that time. It was an association of young nature conservationists. And later on, at the university, I registered in the Faculty of Agronomy. I was not familiar with agriculture, but agriculture became very quickly a passion too. So in my life in general, I try to combine this strong interest for nature and also this passion for agriculture, which is relatively rare in the ecology and agronomy sector. I started my career in West Africa with the European Development Cooperation Agency, where I met first people who were involved in the slash and burn system in the rainforest. And they impressed me very much by their strong knowledge of the ecology of the forest, of plant ecology, of medicinal plants, of, all the indicator plants that can help them to decide when a plot is ready for cultivation, for instance. And I met also livestock herder, the Peul, who are widespread in West Africa, and they too have incredible knowledge about animals, about forage plants, and so on. So after some years in North Africa, I went back to Belgium, where I became quite quickly professor at the University of Louvain. And I teach many things about farming systems, about agroecology already, forage production and so on. And I always try to improve the impact of conventional agriculture on the environment and on biodiversity in particular. During my career, I had also the chance to visit many countries because I participated in many missions funded by the United Nations. So I had quite a big view on the farming systems of the world, on the problems, on solutions that people develop in different environments. And that was, of course, fascinating. I lived also in many countries, in West Africa, in Morocco, in Brazil, in the UK, in Italy, in Rome, and that was also a very interesting part of my life because I discovered more deeply different culture, different way of thinking.
So the main topic of this conversation is going to be agroecology, and I'm suspecting maybe half of the people listening right now already know basic concepts of agroecology, but the other half might be completely new to the subject. And just to make sure that everyone is on board from the beginning of the conversation, and we can maybe get into more depth later, but if we could start by giving us a definition, an explanation of what is agroecology.
I have a very simple definition. Actually, agroecology is not an ideology, and for me it's very important. It's just mimicking nature. And conventional agriculture is based on a fight with nature. And nature is the strongest thing that you can imagine. It's the cosmos, it's the biosphere, it's everything.
Extremely complex, and
humans, and it's also complex. Yes.
Humans thought that we understood better than nature by using.
I think it's clever to cooperate with nature than fighting nature. Because if you cooperate with nature, then nature can be very generous, actually. And biodiversity can provide a lot of services. Biodiversity can protect crops against disease, against pests, can fix nitrogen. That is a very important nutrient for plants and for crops. Nature can provide a lot of services. You have just to understand how nature is functioning, and then you can use it for your own purpose. And agroecology has also been defined as a science, a practice, and a movement. A science, it's obvious. It's the combination of agricultural science and ecology. And it's not just the addition, but it's a systemic approach again between the old, I would say, the old agricultural science, the daddy agronomy, and ecology. And we made a lot of progress in science in the last 10 or 15 years or so about the understanding of soil and human gut microbiota, for instance. And on many other aspects that are not included in the agronomy that I learned and that I teach also.
That's something very interesting, is that many people will see agroecology as going back in time to what we used to do 100, 200 years ago. But actually it's going towards the future because it's taking into account the knowledge that we grew only in the last 10, 15, 20 years about soil science.
Mm-hmm. Yes, agroecology is based on the most up-to-date knowledge of science, but also on the most modern techniques. For instance, a direct sowing machine is a very nice and complex machine. But it is also based on traditional knowledge of farmers, because peasants knew a lot of things. And I mentioned that in the beginning. African peasants I met in West Africa are people who have very valuable knowledge that we can include and combine with the most advanced scientific knowledge.
So it's the best of ancestral knowledge, the best of the knowledge of indigenous people all around the world, combined with the new discoveries in science to create the best possible agricultural system.
Yeah. And also based on the knowledge of current farmers. Yes, that's the scientific part of agroecology. It's a practice. Of course, you can a farmer can adopt the practice of agroecology. And agroecology has been invented by farmers, actually, in South America mainly. But since the beginning of agriculture, about 10 or 12,000 years ago, agroecological systems were developed in some parts of the world, but not everywhere, but at least in some places. So that's the practice.
So that's very conceptual. Could you maybe describe what it looks like? What is agroecology in the real world?
Yeah, agroecology was first developed at plot and farm level, and it progressively extended to the whole agro-food system. But if we focus on farms, it's a system based on biodiversity, because this biodiversity can replace fossil fuel-based inputs such as fertilizer, and especially nitrogen fertilizer, or pesticides, or even the fuels for tractors partly. And so that's the basis. And that's why we invest in biodiversity at all levels, from the soil to the farmers' communities and the landscape. So you have to learn how to do that, because we forgot about natural process, because fossil energy was cheap. And so we replaced, in fact, the services provided by nature and biodiversity by fossil energy. Fossil energy will cost more and more in the future. That's one of the few things that are for sure. This price will increase, and thus also the price of nitrogen fertilizer, pesticide, and fuel. So we have to prepare ourselves to this new society. We have to build a new society that is less dependent on fossil energy. And so the society that developed in the middle of the 19th century will progressively disappear and replaced by something else. We don't know actually what it could be, but we have an idea in agriculture thanks to agroecology. So agroecology has also the potential to change the world, because when you deal with food, you touch to every part of the society. So some examples of agroecological techniques are tillage reduction, tillage intensity reduction. For instance, the abandonment of plowing. That is a relatively recent techniques. The way we plow soils in the 21st century has been developed about 1 century ago. Many people believe that cropping equals plowing.
But I have this image in my head of hundreds of years ago, people with horses plowing the soil already, that I've seen in books. I've seen that in schools or in documentaries. So we were already plowing hundreds of years ago.
No, first farmers used hooves and then other tools, but the first tool that was a bit similar to the current plow appeared in the year 1000 or so, in the Middle Age. But soil horizons were not inverted, It was something that cut a bit the soil, but did not really plow the soil and invert the horizons. And the real plow and deep plowing, because I was speaking about deep plowing at 25, 30 or 40 centimeters, that appeared in the beginning of the 20th centuries with tractors, with the power of tractors, and also the development of more sophisticated plow. So it's a recent story. And it has been designed for destroying life, actually destroying weeds, which is useful, of course. After plowing, the soil is clean, but also for killing pests and also pathogens. And you could say, well, that's fine. But it has also detrimental effects that we understood also in the beginning of the 20th century, especially in North America in the 1930s, with the Dust Bowl and the dramatic effect of plowing on very sensitive soils. And progressively, solutions were developed for reducing soil tillage, and progressively also in the 1990s, actually, soil conservation agriculture was defined and again invented by farmers, by Brazilian farmers. So that is a technique, tillage intensity reduction, also covering soils, because we have to inject energy, solar energy, into the soil. And that creates structure, and it's the plants that are able to, transform this energy into organic molecules by combining solar energy with CO2. And soils have to be covered all the time, because if they are not covered, they are damaged by solar radiations, by rain, and so on. And if they are covered, plants feed microorganisms, the symbiotic microorganisms, bacteria and fungi that deliver the services to plants. So these two techniques are fundamental for soil conservation agriculture and agroecology. But there are many other techniques, better grassland management, such as rotational grazing, recycling nutrients. Agroecology is based on a certain number of principles that have been defined in 2019 by a high-level panel of experts who wrote a big report and who defined agroecology more precisely. And this definition has been adopted by the United Nations, and so now it is the official at global level of agroecology. It's a bit the equivalent of the Brundtland report, which defined sustainable development. When this report has been adopted by the United Nations, nobody discussed that anymore, and it became the definition that was adopted, recognized by all people. And this report on agroecology is the equivalent of that. So agroecology is now very well defined, and among these 13 principles, there is recycling of energy and nutrients, also input reduction, not only for stopping killing biodiversity, but also for production cost reduction, which is interesting for farmers. It's also based on crop-livestock integration. In fact, in the 1960s or so, crop and livestock were progressively, separated. And that was possible because fossil energy was cheap. And it was possible to replace manure, farmyard manure, by nitrogen fertilizer, synthetic nitrogen fertilizer that is synthesized from the atmosphere with the use of natural gas. But if we want to develop a society that is less dependent on fossil energy, we have to recombine again ruminants, and especially cow, with crops. That's an essential combination that is not always understood nowadays because, ruminants emit methane. But again, that is a reductionist approach. You cannot judge something just on the basis of one criterion. You have to look at the whole system, and ruminants are one of the pillars of a sustainable agricultural system. So that's some of the principles, but there are 13 principles. Not only ecological or technical, but also economic and social.
Okay, that have been well defined by the UN, and you follow these principles quite closely in your practice.
Exactly.
What interests me in what you said is it's a necessity to transition from conventional to agroecological farming. It's not just it's not just a nice decision to make, but it's actually a necessity, because in the near future with the rise of cost in fossil fuel and with extreme weather events multiplying, we're going to have to reinvent the way we're farming, and we need to do it as soon as possible. Could you maybe describe for me what would happen to a farm that is farming conventionally and decides to continue that way for the next 20 years? What is this farm risking, and why is it so important for this farm to transition?
But I am convinced that conventional farming and green revolution in general, these systems are collapsing. First, the farmers' population is still decreasing very fast. And we are facing a situation where it's the whole farmers' class that could disappear. And these people have a lot of knowledge, as we said. We need them for producing high-quality products, and for managing the landscape also. So it's not desirable. I'm not dreaming about an agriculture where there would be a lot of sensors in the fields that will send data to a computer, that will send orders to a robot for cropping without any farmer, and also probably without any trees, any edges, because plots managed by robots are to be squared and flat and without any obstacle. That's a nightmare. It's not certainly not my dream. So that's the first thing. Conventional agriculture has been very profitable for farmers at the beginning, and it had success. By increasing production, for instance. But the added value in conventional farming decreased per hectare at least for about 30 years. So it means that it is less and less profitable. And so if farmers want to survive, they have to increase the size of their farm all the time. They have to buy land, larger machine, more animals, and so on. And they do that by having loans from banks, and that's a problem, and that makes the conventional farming not very attractive for young farmers. And your farmers are, of course, very well placed to know the real profitability of the farm of their parents, and most conventional farmers have no successors. The young farmers don't want to take over the farm of their parents because of this problem of profitability, and because of the fact that as soon as they start, they will have to reimburse loans for all their life. And that in a very unstable economic and social environment. That's why they don't want to take this risk. Also, they are very often passionate about farming, but they think that it's not reasonable to be farmers anymore. And agroecology is very different, because we have an ecological and an economic strategy that reduce costs. We increase also the income by targeting quality products, and whenever possible, agroecological farms process their products and they sell them in short and local marketing chains. So if you decrease production costs and you increase income, then the added value increase automatically. And that has been demonstrated in a scientific paper that we wrote with about 30 colleagues by comparing in Europe conventional systems with agroecological systems, and in all regions, in all systems, agroecological systems were more profitable than conventional. And that gives a future to European farming,
That's incredible. So this solution that you're proposing with agroecology, it is working, and it is more profitable than conventional farming. But that surely should give an incentive for farmers to transition to these type of practices, and for a younger generation of farmers to adopt them from the start.
Yes, but the potential of agroecological systems is not enough known by farmers. For them, it's a recent concept. That's the first problem. The second problem is that every change is difficult and risky. Even if you are convinced that your life will be better if you change, the changing period is difficult. Farmers have to learn new techniques, a new approach towards their crops, their soil, and so on. They have to develop new markets and so on. All these things are complicated. So that's why farmers don't move massively to agroecological systems. And that's why an association like Terre Vivante is needed. We offer to farmers first the experience of farmers who were the pioneers in these transitions. They started 20 or 30 years ago, and they can explain to candidate farmers how to avoid the mistakes they did. When I developed agroecological systems in practice, I made also mistakes. So, it's a pity that farmers have to repeat always the same mistakes. And Terre Vivante, the first goal of Terre Vivante is to avoid transitioning farmers to make these mistakes.
You have this knowledge and you're helping farmers with this knowledge to do this transition without doing the same mistakes that previous farmers have in the past.
And so they can make this transition much faster and in a safer way also. And we do that with field visits, mainly from March to December. In winter, we analyze the system of each farm in a systemic way. And we organize small meetings with about 10 farmers. And during one day, 2 or 3 farms explain their system and the others give their opinion about it and how to improve it. And that is a very efficient system.
So you're building a community with the different farmers that you're working with so they can exchange their knowledge together.
Together and with us also.
Yes.
And the third service that we provide to farmers is an individual coaching. They can call us whenever they want for solving a particular problem. Because when farmers visit an agroecological farm, so conventional farmers visit an agroecological farm, they can be convinced by the functioning of this farm. But very often when they come back to their farm, they say, well, this farm was nice, but it's larger than mine. They have tools that I don't have. The soil is different. And I don't understand how to transpose all the things I learned in this farm or during a training or a conference. I don't see how to do that in my own farm. So it's very important to offer them an intensive coaching for adapting agroecology to their particular system. And that's what we offer in Terre Vivante.
So let's imagine I am a farmer. I have a farm in Belgium of maybe 100 hectares. I've been farming conventionally for 3 generations now. I'm convinced that I need to change my practices and transition towards more agroecological practices. And I come to see you to help me. What will be the first steps?
The first steps depend on each farm, actually. Because agroecology is a transition. It's a path. And there are 2 main possible paths. The organic farming path and the soil conservation agriculture path. So it's often easier for conventional farms to adopt conservation agriculture techniques first, because they can still use pesticides and synthetic fertilizer, and they feel that it is less risky to adopt this path instead of the organic path, where they have to cancel immediately all synthetic fertilizer and pesticides. But in Wallonia, there is an important proportion of farmers who adopted already organic farming. But the majority will certainly use the other path that is towards conservation agriculture.
Just a quick pause to tell you that this podcast was made in partnership with a company called Soil Capital. They're a company that promotes a transition to regenerative agriculture by financially rewarding farmers who improve the health of their soils. If you're interested in learning more about them, I will leave a link in the description of this episode. Thank you. To make sure I understand correctly the difference between the two, in organic farming, you don't use any chemicals whatsoever. No synthetic fertilizer, no herbicide, pesticides, or anything. But you can use machines as much as you want. You can plow the soil a lot. But in conservation agriculture, you're trying to reduce soil damage, but you will still use some chemicals. But you will use other techniques to try and reduce your impact on the soil and the ecosystem of the farm.
Yes, there are three components of conservation agriculture: soil tillage reduction, and in fact no-till. Very quickly, these farmers adopt a no-till system. They cover the soil permanently with main crops, temporary grassland, if they have this kind of grassland, and cover crops. And cover crops are sown between two main crops. And crop rotation diversification, so more plants, more plant families. And with these three techniques, they restore very quickly soil life, soil structure, soil fertility. And very quickly, they can stop using fungicide because plants are not sick anymore. They stop using insecticide because the plants are not stressed anymore. They don't attract pests anymore. But they are still using herbicide, and less, but they are still using herbicide. Many of them stop using phosphorus and potash fertilizer because the microorganisms are able to catch nutrients and they bring them to plants. And they do that because plants feed them. So it's a win-win cooperation. But they are still using nitrogen fertilizer, but if they have also legumes in the rotation, they can even reduce nitrogen fertilization. So progressively they reduce the inputs, while organic farming stop using them immediately. But in most organic systems, tillage is very intensive. Not only plowing, but all these weedings operation, and there are more tillage intensity in organic farming than in conventional farming. And when organic farmers have only crops, they are specialized in arable crops, then that leads to a destruction of the organic matter, a decrease of soil fertility, and finally bankrupt. If they have animals in the system, then they can produce farmyard manure and they can keep their soil in an acceptable state, but it's not ideal. So the graal would be to combine both approaches.
Right, but from what I understand, again, it makes more sense to start with conservation agriculture and slowly go towards less chemicals and combine the two, rather than do the opposite?
No, both approaches are valid.
Yeah.
It depends on farmers' taste and also their relation with risk and so on, and their knowledge. So both approaches are valid, but the ideal system would be the combination of both. And that's what I developed in the last 15 years by managing two farms myself, because I wanted to understand it, to feel all the details of this system. And, well, I was one of the pioneers of no-till organic system in Belgium and in France. And in my system, we have, again, a systemic approach. So we don't work only on soil, but also on pests, on disease, on weeds, on nutrients. And that is unique in the world. And we have a preventive approach. We know that we will have weeds, pests, and disease. While in organic farming, people are cropping. And if there is a disease, they have almost no means to control this disease. In conservation and conventional agriculture, they have pesticides, but not in organic farming. So I developed an approach where you can prevent plants to be sick and to attract pests, and also to be invaded by weeds. It's a bit sophisticated approach, but it's not complicated, but it's a complex approach. So there is a difference between complexity and complication. You have to use biodiversity. So, for instance, for controlling weeds, it's plants that control other plants. It's the main crop. It's the cover crops that control weeds.
So this system is working. You've had good results in the farms that you're managing.
The system is working, and when it worked, when I saw that it worked enough well, but of course we improve it every year, I started training farmers in Belgium and France. I record video. I went in different regions. I'm invited by farmers to give trainings for 2 days or so. And the third step was creating terre vivante for speeding up the transition of Belgian farms towards agroecology. But our farmers are not immediately, at least, in an organic no-till system. We accept all types of farm, of system. Respect is an essential value for us. And the exchange between conservation farmers and organic farmers are very fruitful, and so every farmer has to evolve towards its own path and on his own path. But finally, I think that I'm convinced that the Graal would be this organic no-till system.
Talking about Terre Vivante, your NGO, I went on the website, and there's something that really caught my attention, is that you're using a specific system to measure and evaluate the agroecological level of the farms that you're working with. The system is called Oasis, like the band. Could you tell us more about that, please?
Yes, it is one of our strengths and also on specificity. It's using a real agroecological indicator system. It's a real agroecological system because it is based on all the 13 principles that we mentioned before, and on all the components of sustainable development, so the economic, social, and environmental components, but also on techniques and resilience. It's a system that has been developed in Central Asia first, at the request of FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, that asked Agroecology Europe to make an inventory of agroecological system in Kyrgyzstan. So we developed it there, and then we tested and we developed it in different countries of Europe, including in Italy, France, Belgium, and so on. So it's the third version of Oasis now that has been published 1 year ago. And yes, it includes 5 dimensions: the agroecological techniques, the economic aspect, the profitability of the system, social aspects such as fairness, also the stress of farmers, the time devoted to training, for instance, the environmental aspect and biodiversity, and finally resilience. Social aspects are very important, and they are not taken into account in some other indicator system, for instance those developed for regenerative agriculture, that is not well-defined concept, and that focused on soil regeneration and the adoption of soil conservation techniques.
You're taking a more holistic approach to it by including a lot of different elements, including the farmer's well-being, which is something I find really interesting, and maybe
the final goal.
Yeah. I mean, it is. We're talking about farming and about sustainability and about economics and all of these things. But at the end of the day, it's the farmers are the people in the field and working hard every day to produce our food. So it's a key element to make sure that they are healthy and happy and thriving.
Yeah, exactly. And that they are proud of their work and so on. All these aspects are important. And the first problems are often social. Technical aspects can be easily solved, finally. at least more easily than social aspects. The relationship between a son and a father, for instance, and also the relationship with the agro-food industries. That's why fairness in the agro-food sector is so essential, because farmers take much more risk than input producers and also the agro-food companies. And so their income is not very well rewarded for all the risks they take, also, for instance, the weather risk, but also the price fluctuation and so on. So that's why in the last 6 months there were many strikes and troubles with the farming sector, and I think they are justified. But the main problem is income. Also some policies that are too complex, and they feel that, and I think it's true again, that they have too much work on administration and not enough time for production and also economic activities. So that should be improved, and it's a big challenge. So we work on all these things. It doesn't make sense to restore your soil if you are bankrupt 6 months later. And so it's crucial to include in an agroecological indicator system all the dimensions of sustainable development, but also specific aspects linked with the 13 principles of agroecology. And we use this system for making a first scan of a farm. When a farmer joins us, we take a picture, an helicopter view of the farm. And that allows us to identify the strengths and the weakness of a farm and to make recommendations. And each year we discuss these figures in the workshop, where a farmer presents his system to his colleague. And it shows very clearly, in a very simple way, where farmers should improve his system. And then we propose technical solutions. So it's a very efficient tool for farming development, finally.
I'd like to go through some of these specific indicators and ask a little bit in more detail how you measure it, and how you improve them, and what does a perfect 5 out of 5 looks like. I was thinking of talking about soil cover first, because it's such an important topic, and you've mentioned it already, and we've spoken about covering the soil in previous episodes already. So how do you measure the score of soil covering?
Well, each indicator is divided in 5 pieces from 1 to 5. 1 corresponds to a conventional system and 5 to an ideal agroecological system. For instance, in the first dimension, we have an indicator on soil coverage. And then for each score from 1 to 5, we divide the scale in the proportion of soil covered during the whole year, on the basis of the literature, on the basis of practice of farmers in the region. It depends on the type of indicator. And all these methodology is defined in a brochure. There are 2 brochures of OASIS. The first one explains the principle. Yes, it's an introduction to the method. And the second one includes all the methodological details on the record of indicators.
How do you get a perfect 5 out of 5 when it comes to cover cropping? What would it look like?
Well, if you get a 5 for cover crops, it means that your soil is covered almost all the year round, at least more than 80% of the time. So that's very concrete. And
is that the case on your farms?
It was the case in the farm I managed, yes. And it's not so complicated to do, And again, it's essential to capture the solar energy to create a structure in your soil and in your agroecosystem.
The second indicator I wanted to look at is pest management. Here again, how do you measure the level of pest management, and how do you improve it, and how do you get the perfect score?
Yes, in the lowest score, people are using pesticide for controlling pests. So one is again the situation of conventional farming in the region. Two can be an improved management of pesticide on the basis of the recommendation of the traditional conventional advisory service. Three represent a farm that is already well engaged in the transition. And so this farm could starting to replace part of the pesticide, part of the insecticide in this case, by the use of natural enemies that farmers can buy in the sector. But at the same time, he can also sow grass strips that are designed for increasing the population of the natural enemies of crop pests. And 4 correspond to a very good agroecological farm, and 5 is the perfection, which is rare, of course. But in this case, for score 5, farmers don't use pesticide anymore at all, and they rely on the self-control of the system. So in an agroecological system, the system controls itself. So there are enough natural enemies for controlling pests, but didn't appear by accident, of course. It's because certain measures were taken for developing an ecological network.
So it's maybe a little bit counterintuitive for most people, but to get rid of problematic insects, pests, you need to bring in more insects. You need to bring in insects that are predators of the ones that cause problem. And the more diversity you have, the more different types of insects and animals, including birds and so on, the safer your system is against pests.
And the same for bacteria. When you look at the television, you have advertisement for buying products that kill 99% of bacteria. That is a disaster because we need bacteria. We have more bacteria cells in our body than human cells, for instance. And we are not really humans. We are a community of living beings. And the same in the soil. So it's bacteria, symbiotic bacteria that protect plants against pathogens. And the same for insects. And we even raise pests. For instance, aphids. We raise aphids in order to have high natural population of natural enemies. If they are pests, they are natural enemies. And when these pests invade crops, these natural enemies population are high enough to control these aphids, for instance, in 2-3 days. And in 2-3 days, they disappear.
Biological control. And there's no risk that these aphids take over the system and reproduce too much and cause another type of issue?
No, because it's a natural process. So they are often strongly linked with some other insects. So they don't kill other insects that could be useful to the system. That never happens. No. And there are many natural enemies. And in France, there are 5 times more natural enemy species than pest species. And, when I was a student, my professor, when they spoke about insects or bacteria, it was also about pests and pathogens and disease. But in fact, the vast majority of bacteria and insects are useful to the system. So pest and disease are exceptions in nature. And if your crops are placed in a beneficial environment, a good environment for their growth, they will not be sick. When we are normally in good health, it's because we are tired, stressed, or we smoke too much, or we drink too much, then we can become sick. But otherwise, we are in good health. It's the same for crops and livestock. Yes, so nature is not full of enemies, nature is full of allies.
Allies, yes.
We have to change the paradigm.
It's going back to what you said at the beginning of the conversation. We have to work with nature and not against it. I have just a really small favor to ask. I noticed that less than 20% of people listening to this podcast are currently following the Deep Seed on Spotify or Apple Podcast. And it would actually really help the podcast grow if you could take just 5 seconds right now to click on the Deep Seed page and hit the follow button. Thank you so much. What I'd like to understand better is how can we speed up and scale up the transition to these kinds of systems. They seem to be better at everything, at making a healthier environment, producing healthier food. It's better for the farmer and for profitability of the farm. It makes farms more resilient to climate change as well, and more resistant to future fossil fuel price changes. So it seems like a no-brainer that we should transition as many farms as possible to agroecological systems. But how do we do that?
I think that we have to move back to the peasant system that existed in Europe till the middle of the 20th century. And then different things changed, the two wars, also scientific discoveries and so on. And after the Second World War, the situation immediately after the war was very difficult, especially in Germany, in France, for instance. It was a bit better in Belgium, by the way. But politicians felt that peasants will not be able to feed the society, and they promoted a new farming system that they call Green Revolution or conventional farming in Europe, that was based on new genetics, synthetic fertilizer that was invented in the beginning of the 20th century. And finally, they used all the weapons that were used during these two world wars for adapting these weapons to fight nature in fields. For instance, nitrate is a fertilizer nowadays, but it was an explosive at the beginning. Some gas were used in the First World War for killing people, and it's the same kind of gas that is not using for killing insects and so on and so forth. So the large companies that were able to work on chemistry, on also weapons, could produce tools for and machines for agriculture. And nitrate is a fantastic product. It's a kind of bomb in the soil. It disturbs everything, but yields increase very quickly. And the system reached very quickly its goal, feeding the European population. How was that possible? Because at that time, politicians, industries had to convince peasants to move to a new system, completely different. Well, there has been a huge support from charities, the Ford Foundation, for instance, and others, that invest a lot of money for transforming agriculture at global scale, not only in the US, but at global scale. Then many companies were interested to participate in this new system because they earn money from it. Politicians were interested, and so public money was also massively invested for pushing farmers to change their practice. And now with agroecology, we have to do the same. Charities have to invest, in Terre Vivante, for instance, as three financial supporters, private financial supporters. But government should do the same, and unfortunately, agroecology is not very attractive for industries because we replace the products produced by industries by the services of biodiversity. But citizens want to change the system. They want to get rid of all these pesticides and all these negative effect of conventional agriculture on climate and biodiversity and quality of food. So there is a momentum for developing agroecology, but we need more money. Terre Vivante is just a pioneer project to show that it is possible. In Wallonia we had small support from the Walloon government. In France, a minister, Stéphane Le Foll, about 10 years ago, supported the development of agroecology in France and in the world, because France supported also the development of agroecology towards the FAO and through the FAO. And that was a chance. Of course, agroecology is now recognized as a goal for agriculture in France, which is not the case in other countries and in Belgium. But in Belgium, we have a strong basis, a lot of people, citizens who are interested and want to develop agroecology. So in France it started from the top, because France is a very centralized country and Belgium much less. But it's also a strength to have a strong basis and to have a movement coming from citizens. So I have a lot of hope.
So talking about citizens, that includes the people listening right now. How can they help? What can they do to help the movement grow?
But all people can help, because we don't need only farmers and agronomists, for instance, but we need also specialists in economy, in social aspects, in the media. We need journalists, we need bankers, we need all types of citizens, actually.
So you would recommend for people to get involved professionally in jobs that support better food systems?
Yes, they can support food systems where they are. For instance, in school, you can have canteens where only agroecological products are used in the kitchen. The same for the canteens of companies, of administrations.
And where do I find these products? Because I would love to, me myself being quite aware of this topic, I would like to only buy and eat food from these kind of systems, but I just don't know where to find it.
Yes, that's a problem. That's still a problem. We have already organic products, and the organic label is a big success. So you can buy organic foods, especially local organic foods, because a part of the organic sector is industrializing and sold also at global level, which is not really the spirit of the pioneers of organic farming. So you have to buy local organic farming, and not only local, because local can be very bad.
Local can be very bad, and just organic can be problematic too if it comes from very far away and in very industrial processes. So local and organic is ideal.
Local and organic.
Right.
But we are working on the identification of agroecological products in general, but not against the organic label, but by working on the organic label and with organic farmers and the organic sector. That's important. And we are not in favor of another label, such as the organic label, but I think that we could develop agroecological trademarks. And the Association pour une agriculture du vivant in France is working on cooperation with large agro-industries and retailers, which are interested to make their products more agroecological. And then when they are sufficiently advanced in their own transition and the transition of their producers, they are recognized by the association and so identify their products as ecological. And that is an interesting way, I think.
Could we imagine, at the moment, I use an app for many products that I buy, especially for things like shampoo and health products. It's called Yuka, and I can just scan a label at the shop, and it will tell me the score. It's more of a health score. If it uses a lot of bad chemicals, it will tell me that it has a really bad rating. Could we imagine a system in a few years' time where you could do the same, but with the agroecological score of a product? So it would give you an idea on a scope of where it is. The problem with the label is very black or white. It's either or. But when it comes to agroecology, it's not so black and white. It's a spectrum. So having a score rather than a label, is that something that makes sense?
Yes, and research is also progressing in this field. In the near future, there will be possible, I'm convinced of it, to have a near-infrared spectrometer in your portable phone and go through, you can scan, for instance, your food in supermarket and have an idea about the nutrient density of each product. So the proportion of vitamins, of microelements and so on, of two types of carrots, for instance, or apples. And that is something that will exist in the future, I'm sure. We are also we started working with Planet Score for combining the agroecological indicator system with this very promising system that is very simple.
Planet Score, it's called?
Planet Score.
It already exists, or it's a prototype?
Yeah, and it is already adopted by many large companies in Europe. It focuses on biodiversity, pesticide, animal welfare. It's 3 or 4 indicators. So it's not agroecological, but it's complementary to OASIS. And it presents on each product, a scale from dark green to dark red. Red is bad, because green is good. So that's a very simple system. We could also, since you mentioned application that you can use on a smartphone, we should develop application at local level where 10, 50 farmers can put their products that are available every day. And people in the metro, when they go to their office, can choose products on their phone. And these products are transported close to their house.
Right, that already exists. I'm using a system. It's called La Ruche qui dit oui.
Yeah,
it's here in Belgium, but I'm pretty sure it's also in France and Germany and other countries. And that's sort of the idea. It just localizes geographically where you live, and it will give you options from a lot of farmers within a small radius, so quite close to where you are, and it will bring from these different farms the food that you've ordered to a collection point near you. Yeah. And the more people use the system, the more farmers, the more collection points, and the more users, the stronger it becomes. I feel like it's such a great system. But at the moment, it's very good for buying local, not so much for buying agroecological or even organic.
Yes, but you could have an application that accept only agroecological products. And
right.
That's one thing. Another possibility is to develop a farmers market, covered buildings that exist, for example, in France, in Italy, in many Mediterranean countries, but don't exist in Belgium up to now, where you can find a wide range of products, maybe not only food, but also different kinds of products, such as in supermarkets, and also have a facility for park your car, such as it is in supermarkets. The large parkings, you are sure that you find easily a place for parking your car. So places that would be attractive for farmers, because if citizens have to buy their fruit and their vegetables in 2-3 farms every week. It's impossible. They don't have time to do that, especially people who live in cities. So we have to invite new systems for connecting eaters and producers. systems that are adapted to modern way of living, and people, don't have a lot of time for making their shopping in general. So it's Friday night or Saturday morning, and things should be simple, but also recognized as agroecological.
I see. One last question. What gives you the most hope for the future?
The most hope? I wrote recently my dream about the future society, but it's not only one thing, it's a different aspect. But we have first to change different paradigm, and we have to change our attitude towards nature and to stop fighting nature in all our activities, not only in agriculture, but in medicine, in teaching, in everything. It's something that we have to change fundamentally in Western culture, that is reductionist, and fighting nature. We have also to be more systemic, because if you try to solve problems with a reductionist approach, you don't take into account, by definition, all the other aspects of the world. And in reductionist approach, the solution of today is the problem of tomorrow. And each solution generates a large number of new problems. And so in the Western society, we are going from one crisis to another just because we are creating ourselves these crises by trying to solve individual problems. So a systemic approach could create a more harmonious society where, as you said, in agroecological systems, we provide nutritious and healthy food, we improve the environment, we solve the biodiversity crisis, we sequester carbon into the soil by capturing CO2 into the atmosphere, and so on and so forth. And we solve all the problems at the same time. It's possible in agriculture and in all our activities, economic and social activities.
Thank you so much, Alain, for your time and your precious knowledge. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you.
Thank you to you.